I'm going to start with a big understatement warning. The world's divided. Yeah, that's the understatement of the year, right? Ideas and beliefs cause hostility, cause tension. Anybody put politics into politics, followers of it, it's not a tranquil environment, is it? It's very hostile. The GOP debates, the Republican candidates, it's like a high school cafeteria name-calling, and high school maybe being too gracious there, you know. It's like a bunch of middle school kids just pulling out the insults. It's unbelievable. There was, for an example of this, you may have heard about it out in Seattle recently. There was this thing called Pride Fest, and it was a gay pride rally. A bit of it celebrating an expectation of the SCOTUS ruling and overfell to legalize same-sex marriage. And there were two gentlemen out there holding signs. You've probably seen these signs if you've been to a sporting event. You know, you might consider them to be offensive. Repent, you know, the Bible says these types of things. And they were out there in the midst of the protest, walking around and preaching. One of the guys had a microphone and a speaker on them, and they were preaching, just walking around, and the whole thing was caught on film. Well, before long, it turned into a mob scene. People coming up, trying to grab the signs. Eventually, this big guy without a shirt, he looked like a high class in society. Let's just get that out there. Comes up and just starts pounding on the guy. So ideas cause such hostility. They're so divisive. And what about yourself? Have you ever done something rash or done something that you would say stupid because of an argument? A bunch of liars in here, man. Come on now. Come on. I don't need your life story. I don't need to hear the story. You don't need to embarrass you. This isn't confession time. No, but we've all been in just an argument. So it's crazy, right? How just simply disagreeing about something can cause such vitriol, can make you so angry to where you even get into a fight. How many of you have gotten into a fist fight because of an argument? You and some friend. Thank you for your honesty. This is good for you. The first step is admitting that you have a problem. We're proud of you. Yes, you didn't know this is the kind of group that you've come to. But that's something about ideas, right? Ideas are powerful. And when we disagree on them, sometimes hostility is what follows. So what are we going to do about this? What's the solution to the fact that ideas divide, beliefs divide? They start fights, they start wars, they lead to oppression, discrimination. What are we to do about the fact that ideas are so powerful, that beliefs are so powerful, that it leads to such violent extremes sometimes? Well, one of the things we do, and perhaps you've done this, is I just agree to disagree. That's something you can do, right? When it comes to differing beliefs. You know, how many of you are NBA fans in here? Yeah, so you might get into an argument with somebody about who's the best NBA player right now, and you would be right if you said Steph Curry, and you would be wrong if you said LeBron James. True. Yeah. True story. But on that, let's just say, you thought LeBron is the best, and I'm like, no, Steph Curry is the best, and we're going back and forth, and we're disagreeing. We've obviously got different ideas about this. At the end of this, even if we start getting heated, if we start getting emotional, you and I, we can just go, all right, well, we're just going to agree to disagree, and then we go our separate ways, right? That's perfectly reasonable there. But are all things like that? Are all ideas on the same level as who is the best NBA player right now? Are all ideas so benign, so trivial, so to speak, that you can just walk away from them and leave them in the unsettled category? And I think we would agree that that isn't the case. For example, what about same-sex marriage? Is that an issue that we can just say, well, you know what? Let's just agree to disagree. We can't just leave it there, can we? Because public policy hangs in the balance. You can't do that about something like abortion, can you? You can't just say, well, let's just agree to disagree and go our separate way. Why? Because public policy hangs in the balance. inevitably on those two issues, if you just say, well, let's just agree to disagree, well, then the status quo remains. Somebody's idea in those prevails, right? There are some things that you just can't walk away from because they are too important to be left in the category of, well, we're just going to agree to disagree here. So what are we to do about this? Well, what are we to do about the fact that such hostility and rage comes from these things? Is it to end free speech? What do we think?
No.
Does Georgia State have safe zones? Has Georgia State started to implement things like trigger warnings? Have you heard these phrases before? I don't know if it exists here at Georgia State. I haven't heard about it coming here yet, but it's happening all across the country. Free speech is being threatened because, specifically at universities, college students are saying things like, that message hurt me. It offended me so greatly that I have such emotional stress that I don't know what to do with this. That message caused me so much pain, I don't know what to do about this. So universities are starting to limit free speech. If you're not familiar with these things, safe spaces are where any speech that could hurt feelings is forbidden. I hear some snickering about that. Because when you think about college and university, you typically don't think about the need to have safe spaces where people's feelings aren't hurt because of differing views of their own. Well, a trigger warning, you'll find these like stickers, trigger warning labels on, things like perhaps what you would have for tonight. Some schools would make you put a trigger warning next to the information about a talk or a lecture. And trigger warning is something that is usually conveyed on a sign, carried, or posted near the auditorium where a speech is to be given, alerting students to the possibility that the speaker may express an idea that could trigger an emotional response. So, is that a crazy idea? Should there be safe spaces? Should we let an audience know that there's something in this message that you might find offensive and you might have an emotional reaction to it? You might not expect my answer, but I would say yes. I would say, and I'll just say, as a speaker, one of the things that I do is I try to understand my audience. Who is it that I'm speaking to? And what about my message might offend them, might hurt them? And the reason I do that is because I respect you. There's nothing within me that has a desire to intentionally hurt you. And there are some topics that touch something very sensitive in each one of us. Pain is a very real thing. And sometimes just hearing about something brings back pain from a traumatic experience in one's past. And as a speaker, I have no desire to cause that pain in a person's life. So I think, for example, things like a trigger warning is perfectly fine. Who really cares? As a speaker, it's something that I would do anyways. As a pastor, it's something that I do. It doesn't cause me not to speak on issues, but it causes me to think, how can I communicate what is true in the most effective manner and limit as much as I can the pain that is going to follow. So I will give people ample time to know what is coming so that they can prepare themselves accordingly. It's a thing that I think we ought to do because we respect all people, we value them, we want their best, and we're not, venge-filled, spite-filled people that just want to hurt people for whatever reason. But that's not what we're seeing happening, though. If that's all that we were seeing on college campuses, I think we would be okay with that, because I think we would agree with that idea. Don't just hurt people just to hurt people. Give them an opportunity to leave. Give them an opportunity to do whatever. But we're actually seeing something worse than that. We're seeing the suppression of free speech. A couple of examples. I don't know if you know who Mike Adams is. Mike is a friend of mine. He was a part of a 7-year lawsuit with University of North Carolina in Wilmington. They denied him a promotion specifically because of his Christian beliefs. 7 years. That suit went on and he eventually won. He's a writer at Town Hall and If you don't know Mike Adams, you should get to know Mike Adams. He's a front runner. He is leading the way in preserving the First Amendment throughout this country. Anyways, I hit up Mike, let him know that I was going to be speaking here. I said, hey, what are some examples, some good recent examples of universities limiting or violating the First Amendment by quelching free speech on college campuses? And he said, man, you just need to go to campus reform because there are too many stories. Just go there and you'll have more information than you can handle. And I did. I'd never been to campus reform before. I went there and he was right. Story after story after story of universities silencing a particular voice or viewpoint because they deem it too offensive, too painful to hear. University of South Carolina, close to us here, recently there was going to be an event on free speech. It's going to be a free speech event. The students put up posters, and the posters had some offensive type things in it, or some things that people might consider to be offensive, like a swastika, some slang, derogatory type things, just representative of the type of discussion that they were going to have on free speech. How much is too much? Is there a line that you can cross? They went to the university, submitted it, told them what was going to be on it. The university said that is okay, but guess what happened? Somebody started complaining. There were 3 students that saw the poster, filed a complaint, said the messages were, quote, offensive, they were triggering, and the school caved and said, okay, well, I guess we can't have this. So they called those students in, and this is what the students said about their experience, those that were going to host the event. No one should have to explain their speech to a government bureaucrat under threat of punishment, especially on a college campus. But that is exactly what USC made Ross do. So the school brought them in, put them in front of a council to give an account of why they did this. How many college students in that environment are going to press on and speak on that issue anyways? That level of bureaucratic intimidation is going to silence the majority of college students throughout this country. Understandably so. You go to college to get a degree, to grow in knowledge, to get a healthy foundation for the rest of your life. Not many people are going to be willing to risk it over just an event and a poster. So a school saying, we're going to kick you out using that kind of stuff, this is hurtful, this is offensive, remove it or you're going to be suspended. Most people are going to cave to that. And case after case like this is happening on university campus. Another event at University of California, Ben Shapiro was going to go speak. And his topic was when diversity becomes a problem. Seems like a perfectly fine topic, right? What's so horrible about that topic? Well, the president of the university shut it down, and this is Ben Shapiro's reply to this, which is funny enough, just I had to share it. He tweeted this: "Your safe spaces should be renamed fascist areas, you jackbooted intellectual weaklings." That's a pretty, I like that, right? I'm mad I didn't think of that line. They thought that his message was going to be too offensive and they shut it down because there wasn't going to be an opposing viewpoint there. This is happening all across the country. Universities are seeking to silence a particular viewpoint on a lot of issues. What about religious liberty? Should we end it? Would that fix the problem? If you're just joining us, we're talking about tolerance. We're talking about the idea that ideas are divisive. That when people disagree on something, violence and hostility occur. So we're looking at what should we do about this? Should we end free speech? If we did that, would that solve the problem? People are trying to do that. What about ending religious liberty? People are calling for that today. A line that is gaining some traction, or an idea rather, is this: that religious freedom is simply a mask for discrimination and bigotry. So you know, with same-sex marriage issue, there are a lot of people like the county clerk in Kentucky who her responsibility is to hand out marriage licenses. Well, she said it was her conviction that marriage was to be between a man and a woman, so I cannot in good conscience sign my name on this document endorsing and making official your marriage. So she appealed to her conscience, her religious freedom, and you know what happened? She was placed in jail for that. And in light of that, a lot of the conversation was, no, she's just throwing out the religious liberty card, but she's just a bigot. It'd be no difference than someone 40 years ago not serving a black man at a restaurant and hiding behind, well, it's my religious freedom. Saying, no, religious freedom is simply a mask for discrimination and bigotry. We need to get rid of it. Even Hillary Clinton said this, that religious beliefs have to be changed to accommodate public policy on things like abortion. So you know what this is, though? These types of things, if we were to end religious liberty, if we were to control free speech, you know what? We have a name for that. You know what it is? It's fascism. That is what is fascism. Here is a description of it. Fascism is a way of organizing a society in which a government ruled by a dictator controls the lives of the people, and in which people are not allowed to disagree with the government. That is what fascism is. That word, when you hear it, how many of you go, yeah, I'm a fascist. I'm proud to be a fascist. It's a good thing, we should all be fascists. No, we use that term negatively because we understand that is not a good thing. But that is what is happening in our country right now. And the reason is we're just simply tired of fighting. I know you're just tired of it, right? Even with the political environment right now. A lot of people just don't get into politics because they're just so tired of all the dang fighting. All you do is fight and fight and fight, and nothing ever gets accomplished. So I understand the motivation. It's a right motivation. How can we bring forth peace and prosperity and harmony? But our country is a bit off right now because what they're trying to do is silence a certain voice. And that is not okay. That is what is fascism. So what's a better solution? Well, historically, the solution to the problem that people are going to have different ideas about things is something called tolerance. And I know that's a word that you're very familiar with. It's one of the buzzwords of our time, right? We need to be tolerant of people. Well, what I want to do with us tonight is to give us a bit of an understanding of what tolerance is, what tolerance implies, and what tolerance assumes. And one of the things that I'm going to go to at the end of the night is there is a particular worldview that actually promotes, sorry for that spit bubble that went your way, that's why we don't let anybody sit right here, okay? There's a particular worldview that actually provides a good justification for tolerance, but we'll save that. So what tolerance is, and it's simply this: I will not force you to think like me. That's what tolerance is. That's all it is. We disagree, but I'm not going to force you to think like me. Simply say, I'm going to allow you the freedom to think differently. That's what tolerance is. Seems like a pretty rational thing, right? Because think about this. I want to ask you a question. Can you actually force somebody to change their mind? No, you can't do that. It's literally not possible. I cannot control what you think. I can influence it, but I don't have the ability to force you to think a certain way. But you can punish somebody for their thinking, can't you? Yeah. You can punish somebody for thinking differently. But I want to ask you, we have a lot of philosophy students here, what is the danger? Or what are the threats to us as a whole if we start punishing people for their thoughts? Is that a dangerous idea to you all here? If there was simply the thought police? And we're now going to start punishing you not for what you do, but we're going to punish you for how you think. That's obviously dangerous. And here's a couple of reasons why it's dangerous. When you try to punish people for their thoughts, you remove any possibility of true peace and harmony, and you remove the possibility for true progress. I want you to think about a couple of examples. Where would the civil rights movement have gone if we punished people for the opposing thoughts to racial discrimination? Where would women's suffrage be? The women's right to vote? Where would that be? Gender equality, equal pay for equal work. Where would these things be, socially speaking, if we punished the opposing thought? We would be stuck in a discriminatory past. But we're trying to do that this very day, aren't we? We're trying to punish people for having opposing thoughts. In corporations, it is common experience. If you deny, or rather I should say this, do not affirm and celebrate same-sex marriage, they're being pushed out. That is a way to punish somebody for their thoughts, right? No case or evidence of actual discrimination, meaning there's nothing that has been taken away from somebody unwrongly, just for holding an opposing view. They are losing jobs, not getting promotions. My friend Mike Adams is an example of this. Progress does not move forward. It also causes us to stop thinking about issues in a meaningful way. I want to just throw this out here. And we'll have a Q&A time, and maybe we can talk about this. Do you feel the freedom to even question if people are born gay? I don't feel that freedom. I expect even in a room like this that I say that, and I'm going to be hated and mocked. And we're seeing that happen in the public square. Just questioning something makes you a social outcast with this. And you know what that does? The issue is now settled and solved, and we won't look into it any further. But wouldn't it be right for us? Talk about gender issues too. The idea of, well, I was born biologically a male, but I know that I'm actually a woman. It's just the way I was made. Do you feel the freedom to question that? Do you think any money would be given in research to explore that? Do you think that it would be worth our time to at least examine the impact of sexual abuse on things related to sexuality and gender issues? Certainly seems reasonable to me, because are you aware of, for example, the statistics that some say as high as 3 out of 4 girls are molested by the time age 18? That sounds like an inflated number to me. More conservative ones put it at around 60%. I imagine every one of you knows someone that's been molested, though. Do we really not think that a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old that has had that kind of traumatic experience, that it is not going to affect them in some way? Now, I'm not making an argument here for whether or not you're born gay or not. I'm not making an argument whether your gender is simply something that is the result of your own decision, that you can just form for yourself. I'm not making the case here. I'm simply saying I think it is reasonable for us as a people to want to examine these things. And the danger to us all is progress is stopped because we simply silence an opposing view that we don't like. Is that good for us? No, it is not good for us. And I think all of us, even if we disagreed on an issue in here, I think all of us in this room see the value in allowing the freedom of thought to exist, freedom of speech to exist, so that we can wrestle with problems seeking common ground, and also having a right anticipation of being able to progress, or to achieve progress as a people. Hold your questions on that, because I can see in your eyes you're ready to go back and forth on that one, and I look forward to this. So that's what tolerance is. I am going to allow you the freedom to think differently and express those thoughts in public. What tolerance implies is that I think you're wrong. And you're like, okay, yeah, duh. Why the heck did we get this pastor from Peachtree City up here? Everybody knows that. Well, the reason I point that out, though, is that's not the way tolerance is being used today. The way that we use tolerance today is that all ideas are equal. That you need to tolerate other people, and the assumption in the way that we're using it is, my idea is just as good as your idea. But tolerance doesn't imply that, right? The reason I am tolerating you and your idea is because I think that it is wrong. Is that a wrong idea or position for me to have? Is it fair enough for me to go, I think you're wrong? Is there anything threatening in that? But common sense, let me just ask this to you guys. Are all ideas equal? No, they're not. They're not equally moral, and they're not equally beneficial. Here's an example. Would you agree that torturing babies for fun is equally moral as nurturing them and caring for them? Are they equally moral? No, obviously not. I'm a little afraid of what this is going to be here, but go ahead. Oh yeah, we'll shake hands too.
I mean, I see where you're going with that, but couldn't you argue that they're all equally relative?
Equally relative. Hold that question so we can just jump into it at the end. We'll get into that, because it could be that something I'm going to say might go towards that in a minute. That's a great question. But I think on a common sense kind of level, we would go, okay, that's not the same. We're not going to say that those are equally valuable ideas. But what about this? What about equally beneficial? Are all ideas equally beneficial for us? Just an example being, are all economic systems equally beneficial? Socialism versus capitalism. It's right for us to have a debate on that, isn't it? And not just silence our opponents. Because do you know, just for example, the thing that has brought the most people out of poverty in all of history is capitalism? So I think you should be right to have an engagement and a conversation about this, because I think we all just intuitively know that not all ideas are equally beneficial to us. And we can explore that idea more here in the Q&A. So tolerance implies that I think you're wrong, because not all ideas are equal. I think we can agree upon that. Here's one thing that's really interesting to me. Tolerance assumes something. I think most of us in here would agree that we should tolerate people and their opposing views. Why, though? What does it assume here? It assumes that I think you, the person, are valuable. Here's what I mean by this. Hey, does truth exist?
No.
No. Is it true? Is that true? You think so. So now you don't know. So is it true that you don't know if truth exists? I give up. What I want to say is, well, let's flip it around here. The idea there is no such thing as absolute truth. Have you heard that statement before? Can you flip that around and simply ask, is that absolutely true? You see the problem we're in, right? If you deny the existence of absolute truth, you affirm it because you have made an absolute claim on the nature of truth. Truth does not exist. Is it true that truth does not exist? Do you get it? Are you catching on? You cannot deny the existence of truth without affirming it in the process. So I think what that shows us is that it is right for us to tolerate each other, afford each other the space to think and breathe as we all work together to find out what is true, what is moral, what is right, what is beneficial, what is good. So how do we engage other people? Because that's a lot of the problem here. I really think our culture is moving away from relative truth. I think they're starting to speak in absolute terms again. They're saying things like it is wrong to deny a man the right to get married. They're affirming the existence of truth, even in morality. So the problem is, well, how do we engage in topics and conversations where we disagree? The foundation is tolerance. The idea, I'm going to respect you as a valuable person. I'm not going to try to force you to think like I do. So the key now is, well, how do we do this in a respectful, productive, and healthy manner? And I want to just say one thing for those of you in here that would identify as a follower of Jesus Christ. The starting place in engaging other people on ideas is your character. And I have a book here that deals with this. That's what relational apologetics is about. It's about how to defend the Christian faith, to defend that which is true in your relationships. And a good bit of the book just simply focuses on how to do this. How are we going to do this? And the very first chapter in that is simply holiness. Live a good life. You know, as it relates to just the issue of God, does He exist or does He not? Christians make the claim, what? God does exist, but not just that He exists. What do Christians claim to know? God. That's what they're claiming. I know Him. That's what they say, right? You've heard the cliches. It's not religion, it's relationship, right? You hear all these cliches, right? That's the Christian message. It's not just that God exists, but that I know Him. I know who He is in an experiential way. I know what He says is the right way to live. Because He's the creator of life. He Himself is the standard of life and what is good. And I know what He expects from us morally. Now, those of you that are not a believer, when you see a Christian that is going to argue with you over the existence of God and morality and things like that, and they live a worse life than you do, what does that say about their message? It's a bunch of crap. And I think you're right to think that. The foundation for you believers in here in engaging a world that's not going to have the same beliefs as you is your character. That you live a life that reflects the message that you're teaching and that you're preaching and that you're sharing. Respect people that way. Don't be a hypocrite. We have made the grandest of all claims. The biggest question of all life, where did we come from? We say we know. Is there a God? We say we know. What does this God expect from us? We say we know. But by the way, we really don't. We're awful people. Yeah, we're rude. Yes, we're jerks. Yes, we do the very things that we say you shouldn't do. Yes, we're a bunch of phonies. Let that not be the foundation for your engagement. I think that's pretty universal, right? Even if you're not a Christian, what's the foundation for engaging other people? I think it starts with who you are, not what you know. That'd solve a heck of a lot of problems, right? Second is respect. How do we engage? We engage with respect. And here's a crazy idea. We actually respect people by engaging them, though. That's a counterintuitive idea, right? Because we think that, oh gosh, if I'm going to disagree with you, this might be hurtful, this might start a confrontation, so we just need to tolerate each other, which means let your idea exist, and all ideas are equal, so we're just not going to talk about it anymore. There's that push, right? Just don't fight about these things. But that is not a form of respect. You patronize somebody when you don't engage them, when you think they're wrong. It's what you do with children. Oh, yeah, okay, yes, you believe in Santa Claus. Yes, that's okay. Oh, you patronize. You let them remain in false beliefs because who cares? Yeah, they believe in fairies. So what? They think Snow White's an actual person. I'm not going to hurt. Okay, whatever. It's patronizing. It's what you do with the insane. It's what you do with children. It's not what you do with adults that you respect. You don't let them just remain in what you understand to be a wrong idea. That's patronizing. It's actually disrespectful. I respect you as a person when I confront you with what I think is a wrong idea. Now, I'm not going to judge you, the person, to be bad. The very reason I'm engaging you is because I recognize you have worth. And I want you to flourish. And I think this idea you hold is actually robbing you from human flourishing, from a good existence. And that is why I'm going to engage you. And I think we would agree that is the type of world we want to live in, isn't it? We want to live in a world where people will respect us by pointing out our wrong thinking. That's not the problem, is it? It's usually how we do that. So the second thing is not only do we respect people by the fact that we're engaging them, we respect people by using appropriate tactics. We respect people by using appropriate tactics. For example, there is a difference between manipulation and persuasion. Persuasion is good. Manipulation is not, in case I needed to point that out. What are some examples of manipulation? Well, for me, here's an example with my own children. Because you've heard Christians accused of brainwashing their kids, right? You're just brainwashing your kid. You're just manipulating. Well, here's how I walk the fine line with my very own children. In persuading them to consider the things that are true, to come to an understanding of truth, and not manipulating or coercing them into thinking a certain way. So, for example, how do we not manipulate but persuade? One simple thing is acceptance is not a condition of agreement. And you can do this with your friends. We sometimes exclude people from the group because they don't think like us. Unless you think like me, I'm not going to accept you. And you do see parents do this with their kids. You disagree with me, you're outcast. So in my home, acceptance is not the agreement is not the condition for my acceptance of my kids. And that's a big thing that I think we should carry with us everywhere, because that's how you manipulate people. Well, I'm going to accept you only if you think like I do. So ways that I apply this in my church, for example, is you just listen to some of our past sermons and you hear this theme over and over and over again. If you have any questions about what was preached, if you disagree with any of it, you're welcome to come bring those questions. You're welcome to have fellowship with us as we talk about some of these things. And sure, I'm going to persuade you, try to persuade you, and I expect you to do that to me because you respect me. And together, we are truth seekers. So I try to form at my church a community of truth seekers, and the only way you can do that is if you put forward to the group, you are accepted here because of who you are, not what you think. Because when acceptance is what you get when you agree, that's manipulation. Free thought cannot be there. So understand the difference between manipulating and simply trying to persuade someone. Another simple practical tool for us in how do we engage in these things is simply know the difference between a public debate and a private conversation. A lot of your private conversations feel like debates, don't they? It's because where do we learn about these issues? Especially those of us that are in college. We learn about these things from platform speakers. We go to debates and we see how these ideas are engaged. So that's where we learn it. But we've been lazy and simply applied the same venue to our living room. Well, here's a simple difference. When you're speaking publicly or when you're in a debate, your target is the audience. If I were debating somebody here tonight on the existence of absolute truth, my goal is not to convince him, it's to convince you. So I'm going to use tactics that are appropriate in doing that. I might be more stern. I might even imply sarcasm. I might even use a bit of mocking to show how silly the idea is. Because in a debate, the ideas take center stage. The people, in theory, are the kind of the background noise to it. But in a conversation in your room, you take center stage. And so you use different tactics. You listen. You ask questions. And the reason a lot of our conversations are so unprofitable is because you have two people lecturing to an audience that's not listening. They're employing debate kind of tactics with their roommate. And you know what happens. You've just been there. You're just talking past each other and nothing is happening. So you know one of the things I do when I'm talking with a person, not an audience, I know you are all people, but when I'm talking to an actual person in front of me, I listen way more than I speak. Listening is not easy, is it? What are you always doing when you're talking to somebody, especially about something you disagree on?
Thinking.
You're thinking. What are you thinking about? What to say next. Is that an effective way to have a conversation with somebody? Is that an effective way to try to pursue? I'm not picking on you because we all do it. That's so not effective. Because inevitably, what do? You don't respond to the person. You respond to the position you think they have. But do people hold nice, neat textbook positions on things? You see this with people that get into apologetics all the time. They read these apologetic books, and then they get into a conversation with somebody who disagrees, and they start regurgitating these textbook answers. But people don't hold textbook beliefs, do they? It's messy. It's not neatly kind of organized. People that don't believe in God, for example, don't have a clear outline on that. It's this, it's over here, it's this. And you have to listen to the person, not just respond to their position. So one of the things that I do that I would encourage all of you, Christian or not, take this skill with you. It will make your conversations much more effective. I don't ever have a conversation with somebody without my phone or a pen. And the phone isn't for Google. The phone is so I can take notes. And I can do something like this. Okay, so the reason you don't believe in God is because there's so much evil in the world. Did I understand you right? Okay, hang on just a second. Make sure I write that down. You don't think God exists because evil exists. And if God exists, like you say it, if He exists, He would be all good and all powerful. And if He's all powerful, He would be able to remove evil, and He would want to because He's good. Is that your question? Have I got that down right? What does that technique give you?
Your stance.
What's that?
Your stance.
Make sure that you've understood it, right? What does it give you?
The ability to reference it when you're coming up with your answer, or to form your answer based on everything that they said.
Practically speaking, how long did that take me? Not that long, but about what?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. That's actually an eternity in a conversation, isn't it? Let me stop talking for 5 seconds. That 5 seconds of silence in a conversation is a long time, isn't it? So if it takes me 30 seconds to write something down, that feels like an eternity. It's actually a long time. And it affords you the opportunity to think. That is the time to think. In simply writing down what the other person's position or question is, it allows you to it allows you to fully understand where they're coming from. Make sure you got it right. That you're not just responding to what you think their position is, but what actually their position is. And then it gives you time to think. And when you're just kind of doing that, what else does it allow to happen? What did we already say always accompanies two opposing ideas? Anger and frustration, right? When you're just writing something down, what does it give everybody a chance to do? Just chill out and cool. Let me just ask you, are those more effective conversations than those kinds of conversations? Yeah, way more effective. You can think more clearly when you're calm. So how do we respect people? We simply respect people by using appropriate tactics. We're not out to manipulate, we are out to persuade. And we can respect somebody that's going to try to persuade me respectfully. I actually respect a person that does that. It shows me that you value me enough to risk an uncomfortable conversation because you think there's something in my life that's robbing me of living life fully. I can respect a person for doing that. And if they're actually listening to me, taking the time to write down my questions, keeping a conversation calm, that's something we can all benefit from. I think you would agree. And lastly, we respect people on having well thought out answers. Do people typically have well thought out answers? No, they don't. I know Christians get attacked all the time for not knowing why they believe what they believe. My experience with atheists and skeptics is no different. We just live in a land of assumptions. We have people that think in 144 characters. They can't express their beliefs more than a sentence. Most people use sound bites to express what they think they believe. And you simply ask a person a question past the regurgitated sound bite, and often you find a whole bunch of other assumptions just kind of thrown together. Most people don't have well thought out answers. And let me just say this, friends, our society is cultivating that. Our society is producing non-thinkers because we seek to silence those that disagree with us. And I'll be honest, we've seen this in the church. And now we're seeing this in culture at large. And wherever you see the repression of free thought, that is a wrong, I would say, evil thing. And one of the things I get from a Christian perspective all the time is I run into somebody who grew up in the church and now they say they reject God, and I ask why. Recently I had a conversation with somebody on this. And so what was your big reason for leaving Christianity and thinking God doesn't exist? And you know, I'm ready for the well thought out answer, right? You know what I get over and over again, as I just got? Well, nobody ever let me ask a question. I grew up in a church where I went to my pastor and I questioned him about, could Noah's Ark actually have that many animals on it? Where did all the water come from? You know, I just wanted a simple answer to that question. And my pastor said, I don't know, you just need to have faith. Basically, shut up. If you're a good Christian, you don't ask questions. That's an unbiblical idea, by the way. We see the example of both Jesus and his apostles, that what they did with people that did not think like them. They welcomed them, they engaged them in thought-provoking conversation. But we've seen it in the church for a long time. Just shut up and have faith. Don't ask a question. Let me tell you this, friends, we're seeing the exact same thing in culture from the other perspective. It's not good anywhere you find it. And this leads me to kind of the conclusion here. Just a question to cause you to consider theism. Not even Christianity, but just theism. Because for tolerance to actually be a meaningful thing, not just a thing we've made up, there has to be something that exists. And it is intrinsic human value. Because if you are not valuable because of what you are, if you don't have value in that, you only have value based on a couple of things. What good you can do for others or what good you can do for me. So what justification is there in naturalism for me to respect you as a person if you think differently than me? There is no justification for that. What naturally follows from naturalism is simply to grab enough power to silence those that oppose your will, what you want. But theism provides a framework and a context for intrinsic human value whereby all people are equal because they share equal value in what they are, not what they're able to do or able to produce. And as tonight's talk isn't on that, I will let that thought hang there and we can bounce it back and forth in a Q&A time. With that, friends, we're going to open it up for Q&A. Hit me with whatever you've got. We'll see if I can practice what I preach.
So I actually, the school I went to before this one was exactly the kind of school you described at the beginning of your speech. And I was horrified by it when I got there.
Oh man, you bouncing? I was expecting some good questions here.
I really want to ask you questions too, but I have to meet someone, unfortunately. Unfortunately.
Hey, well, give us the question you would have asked and we can bounce it around. Or for the next time you're here, they can follow up.
What
with
was the one you were going to ask earlier?
Well, it was on the spot. Can't do it.
Ah,
Well, back.
Hey, hit me up, man. You can ask me a question online, email. I'm easily found.
Okay.
Hey, follow up, man. Hey, you got to dip, but I understand.
Yeah.
No worries. All right, take care.
That was some food for the road.
Anyway, yeah, so what you're saying is entirely true. That's what's happening. And it's scary. And I felt unwelcome, and I felt like this was kind of dystopian world that was being turned. Like it was just the worst place you could possibly be. I'm really worried about where we're going as a country, knowing that so many institutions are educating people who will be our leaders in politics, in business, and law. It frightens me. And I'm not sure, I mean, tolerance is a great way of living as an individual. And I want to know where you think we're headed as a country now. If there's any way to stop it, what we can do to prevent that kind of soft fascism from permeating everything that we can see and do.
Yeah, it's a hard one to answer. It's hard to predict where things will go because you just never know what event is going to happen to change everything. I would say that the track that we are on is the promoting of one perspective on life, social issues, etc., and the silencing of the opposing voices. That's where it seems that we're headed. Now, we're not there because there are some pockets of victory. Like, for example, Mike Adams' case, he won. The two examples that I gave earlier, Ben Shapiro at Cal State, the president said you can't do it, but then there was a massive outpouring of support for the event. They still were able to have the event despite a lot of protesters. Protesters even pulling the fire alarm to silence it. So we are seeing kind of a mixed bag of those that are seeking to silence or do away with free speech. They're winning in some cases, and they're losing in some cases. So it's really too hard to know where it is going. I think the way forward, though, is in things like this. I think in small group settings, especially if it starts with, I would just ask for believers to lead the way in this, to be modelers of what it is like to have productive, thought-provoking, respectful conversations about very important issues. Because I think most people see the value in having a good, honest conversation about important life issues. I think most people will see the danger in one group silencing another group. I think most people see that. The challenge, though, is like what I've said before. Well, I'll just level my accusation at the church. The church has been producing non-thinkers for 20 or 30 years at least. So Christians by and large don't have anything educated to say, and society's trying to place Christians at the kids' table. And I would say to some degree they should be at the kids' table because they can't speak about anything meaningful unless it has a mascot. Christians can talk all day long about their Georgia Bulldogs. But you ask them anything meaningful and they got nothing. So they should be at the kids' table. So the way back, I'll just make the appeal to the church, cultivate a life of the mind. And the way that you do that mostly is by creating an environment where people are free to disagree. And that's when free thinking and questioning and learning happens, when they feel the freedom to dissent from what they perceive to be the norm. That is what fuels progress and a firm understanding of what is true.
Yeah, I was going to maybe ask you, as a Christian and someone who deeply loves apologetics, I often find myself in situations where I'm not necessarily around non-believers, but I'm actually around other Christians. And they actually have this like recoil when they hear the word apologetics. And I feel like it's probably because they think that we just like argue with people over useless things. I'm wondering, and so I end up being in this position where I'm almost trying to give these Christians the gospel of apologetics, like just to show them that, hey, no, this is useful, and you should probably know some of this stuff. So what do you think is like the best way to reach out just to other Christians who don't even see apologetics as useful?
All right, so your question, if I understood it right, is you have a lot of Christians that basically say, I have no use for answers. I don't need to bother myself with what's true. I just know that God exists and that's good enough for me. I have faith and that's good enough for me. So how do you kind of persuade and convince them? I think the answer lies largely in them seeing how knowledge has affected you. I think that by and large, one of the things the church needs is they need to appreciate and have a love of learning. And a love of learning and a love of knowledge doesn't come through a lecture. You can't just tell people, you know what, you should learn more. You need to learn the cosmological argument. Why do I need to learn it? Well, the starting point, they can look at your life and see how it has benefited you. That you're a gracious person, that you have answers to meaningful questions, that you're active. One of the reasons I think the church distrusts apologists, because they sit in rooms and do nothing but spend time with free books. They don't see practical good of this. Oh, you're just a know-it-all. That's great. I don't really care if you know it all. They want to see what comes from this knowledge. So part of it, just on a practical, tactical level, build relationships. On an adult level, and not that you're not adults, but you're in the academic environment. Once you get out into the professional environment, I get a lot of working adults that say, my pastor just doesn't get apologetics. And some of my questions is, well, does your pastor even know you? What have you ever done for the church? Do you serve in the nursery? Well, no. Why would I serve in the nursery? My ministry is apologetics. No, go serve your stinking pastor. Let them get to know you. Serve your friends. Invite people into your home. Let them see what your life looks like. That is often the way that you get people's door into it. But then just be involved in evangelism and constantly be in front of people with what you have and let it be a bit more natural. I understand it. I do. I understand there's a lot of people that are opposed to it. My approach and my tactic is one, they have to see why they need to have it. And that doesn't come from just being told you need to know something.
Okay, so I've got an application question. Got a lot of college students in here. Sometimes people will have to bring up an issue with their parents, and they know they have a very different viewpoint. Maybe it's about money, maybe it's about school. What advice do you have to give the students here about how you approach your parents when you know you have very different opinions on a topic when you need to bring it up?
Yeah. Yeah, but for instance,
On money.
on money. So
Let's talk about money.
you and your parents have a different
Viewpoint on money.
Yeah. Well, by and large, again, one of my tactics is simply that I ask more questions than I make statements. So that's just a soft way into a conversation. Rather than saying, Mom and Dad, I think you're wrong about this. You simply say, Mom or Dad, have you ever thought about, fill in the blank, whatever it is. Have you ever thought about the value in doing this or doing that? Have you ever questioned or considered, or another simple way to do it is, Mom and Dad, how did you come to your conclusion? And then you just start a conversation where truth is the goal, not just winning an argument. So that's one of the things that I do is, and I think you can apply that pretty universally, whenever you need to bring up a subject that is, it's going to be confrontational, you think differently, one of the softer ways to do it is just bring it up by asking a question. I say you should engage. For two reasons. One, practice. If you can type out your answers on Facebook, you'll become very articulate on things. Because when you do a long Facebook response, which doesn't have to be long for a Facebook thing, 2 paragraphs takes up that much space, right? If you can get your answers concise, you become a much better communicator. So it's practice for you. But secondly, this is my earlier point, when Christians are silent, it speaks very loudly. And what it communicates is we actually don't have answers to these things. So, to answer your question, I gauge the environment. If it's just me and a couple friends, maybe I don't say anything. If it's somebody in a room like this, I will find one thing in that's within my wheelhouse, and I will try to drive it there so that I can answer a portion of that question in a meaningful way to show at least one thing to the group, that Christians have well thought out answers for this. And in most difficult questions, and this just comes through experience and learning, because questions come in all kinds of ways, like the problem of evil. There's probably 1,000 different ways that question might come to you. And just through seasoning experience, you begin to identify and you're able to bring it back to the root of the problem of evil, something that you have a handle on, and then you can communicate that to the group. I don't know if that's helpful or not, that's a good question.
I just comment on Facebook. I guess also a way to practice being civil as well, Facebook based.
Yeah.
Not that it always is civil, I get pretty heated sometimes.
Yeah.
I enjoy it.
I'll tell you some of the things I do in Facebook that I don't, or some of the things I do in Facebook, some of the things I do in public debates that I don't do in private, is I use language like, that's actually a very bad argument. That's something that I would actually not really ever say to my friends. I wouldn't be, I probably wouldn't just do that. I take more liberty in debates and things just to call things out because, again, the ideas take center stage instead of the people. But that's good. No, it's good to engage it.
So we have, last semester, we have what we call street preachers. We have and everybody knows this, and they can comment on it also. So they come into the library plaza to basically yell at people with banners saying,
right.
So you know, so I went to a street preacher to ask him, like, why are you doing this? And is this the way how you should preach the gospel? He told me a metaphor as that, like, you have people in a house, and the house is burning down. And so, which refers to, eternal hell and heaven. So just demonstrating the importance of the issue and wanting to affect changing it. So how do you respond to that?
In general, I think public protests is something that we can encourage as a society. Whether it's the street preacher, whether it is the gay activist, whether it is the end, poverty, sidewalk, signs, megaphone, that's something as a society we can tolerate.
What advice would you give in knowing when it's time to use intellectual arguments and discerning when it's time to be more, when you know that the conversation is becoming really more emotional and about, spiritual needs versus intellectual needs?
Biggest thing take away, because a lot of these questions come back to kind of the same answers for me. The biggest thing, just don't talk as much as you're used to talking. It's the biggest mistake apologists, counselors, pastors make. They have somebody who has a problem, a different thing, and they think they're going to fix it by just running their mouth. The best way to understand what a person needs is by listening, asking questions. As a believer, while all this is happening, you ask God for insight and wisdom. When you do those things and you do this routinely, you become better at it. Sometimes it's hard to know, I'll be honest. Sometimes you just don't know. Sometimes I struggle with, should I say something? Should I not say something? And you're going to make mistakes. There's going to be times when you said something and you should have been quiet. There's going to be times when you're quiet and you should have said something. But the great thing to understand is with most people, you have the opportunity, if you respect a person, to have the second conversation. Sometimes you don't afford yourself the second conversation, you just want to shut up and become somebody that nobody wants to talk to you.
As you were saying, it's better to, listen instead of talk. Just going back to the example of the street preachers, I think we all know who they are in the courtyard. They often talk more than they listen. So that being intolerant, if I'm correct, should we tolerate intolerance?
Yes. Yes. You should tolerate intolerance. Well, it depends on what you mean by that. I mean,
Can we engage them? And how
should you engage them and say you shouldn't do that? Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the whole idea tonight. You think somebody is doing something that is not good, not productive, could be done better. That's the kind of world we want to live in, right? Respect them enough to engage them in that. Should we seek to stop it forcibly? I think no. That's an example of limiting free speech. That's an example of fascism. I'm going to silence those people that are doing things the way I don't think it's best. No, you can just engage them. I think there's, I've not done street preaching. I think there's a case that can be made for it, though. I think it falls into the category, though, of public protests. It's the same kind of thing. I have a message, there's a public, I'm going to communicate it. I think that is something that is perfectly fine. And going back to the thing you brought up there, was they're not listening. Well, not every environment affords you the opportunity to listen. Again, when I'm standing here speaking, if this room were 1,000 people, my goal isn't to listen and understand the room. I do that before I come. Who's my audience? What do they like? I cater a message towards that. I'm not going to listen then, I'm going to just speak. Same kind of thing is made for the street preacher. They're obviously not going to listen then, they're just going to do it. The environment isn't the same as the one you're living in. But yeah, still, here, by and large, you don't think that's the right thing for them to do? Yeah, go talk to them about it. That's what we want to create and cultivate, a tolerant society where we engage people on differing ideas. Yes, ma'am.
There was a university that had a sorority that, they couldn't respect a certain ethnic group, and then that ethnic group felt really, offended. Yeah, and so should we tolerate that? Because it is free speech.
Well, what I would need, I guess, or I would ask for, what happened? What were some of the specifics? What was done that caused the offense, or what?
It was against African Americans, and it was a sorority group that talked bad about them. And some people went out in the university, out in the yard or something, and they protested against that, and then it became violent.
Well, here's what I would say, without knowing all of the details about this. When we say should we tolerate it, that doesn't mean that we should not hold people accountable for things that they do. What we mean by tolerance in general is that we need to create a society where people are able to freely express their thoughts. If you think their thoughts promote something harmful, then you should engage the person because you respect the person. But the danger for a society is when we simply stop all people that we disagree with from speaking. Like we had said earlier, you can't actually achieve peace and harmony that way, which is the goal. And you threaten future progress about being able to think about issues. Now, there are certainly some issues that are very sensitive. There are certainly some people whose thoughts are causing a big problem, and on case-by-case situation, there might be the right opportunity for a person or a group to be silenced because they are causing so much problem. For example, I've been a teacher before, and there are certain kids that just keep going on and on and on and on and on, and at some point you do have to get them out of the room. But in general, am I going to prohibit all students from ever sharing an opposing voice to mine? Obviously not. So it's one of these things where as a society we have to have a bit of flexibility within ourselves, employ a bit of common sense, and not just make blanket statements on it. If you say these types of things, you're a bigoted, hate-filled person, you can never say those things, we must silence you. That's a great question, and I would say that we would need to examine each instance on the merits of, or on the specific details of each case. But it's a good question.
You think a good basis for silencing someone would be civility? If people can't engage civilly, then they shouldn't engage.
So you just silence both of them for a time period?
Or
time out?
I just mean if you can't sit down and talk about your ideas without threatening people, then you shouldn't talk about your ideas.
Yeah, no, I don't, because I actually saw a comedian say this recently. He said, "When did sticks and stones won't break my bones stop being relevant?" He goes on this bit about people going, I'm offended," and he says, "So what? So what? Nothing happens to you when you're offended." And he goes on and he makes this joke. He says, this person comes in and says, "I went and the comedian talked about God and I was offended. And then I woke up the next morning with leprosy." He makes this joke about what nothing happens to you when you're offended. And we're so threatened by anger and hurt feelings when I don't think it's not as threatening as we're making it out to be. So I'm not going to rule out the possibility that there is a particular group that is causing so much problem because of how they're engaging in the issue that we as a society basically have to kick them out of the classroom. But not everybody that holds that belief, it's really not their beliefs at that point, it's their actions, right? It's not their ideas that we're excluding, it's them as people because of how they're behaving, which is what we're all fine to agree on. There's certain behavior that is not appropriate. We don't want to say there are certain ideas that are excluded. We want to say there is behavior that is never okay. And I think that's how we draw we bifurcate, or we take the scalpel and narrowly slice between things. It's when is your behavior the problem? Because we don't really want to just start silencing ideas, it's behavior.
Can you talk about the word discrimination and how like society's portraying that, and obviously they're portraying that as always a bad thing. It's don't ever do that, and just kind of speak to that issue.
Right, sure. So on kind of a basic level, discriminate means I am going to not allow you to take part of something that I get to, and I'm going to not let you based on something that's not fair. So for example, you have a restaurant and you don't let black people in. You are not letting them have access to them based on the color of their skin. So that's the bad form of discrimination. Discrimination in general is something that we do all the time. And there's not anything that necessarily is wrong in discriminating. For example, we discriminate against 6-year-olds when we don't let them take a high school class. You know, we draw lines of distinction and simply say this is not for you, but we provide non-arbitrary types of things, and that's okay. All laws, to a certain extent, discriminate against certain things. And so, for example, to take a recent thing like same-sex marriage, we're saying that it's discriminatory to not let two men get married. And what we're saying is, or what the argument was before it was changed, is no, it's not discrimination, because marriage as it is defined is between a man and a woman. So by the definition of what marriage is, we're not discriminating against you. You don't want to have a marriage. What you're asking for is not marriage. So it's not discrimination. You have excluded yourself because you don't actually want a marriage. Does that make sense? But that's kind of where we're seeing that word used wrongly. We're seeing it in same-sex marriage. But the point of it being is that discrimination always happens. There is unjust reasons to discriminate, and there are perfectly just reasons to discriminate. A thing like marriage is perfectly fine to discriminate, because even marriage laws right now discriminate. 3 people can't get married right now, can they? That's discrimination. A man and a dog can't get married right now. We're discriminating against them, right? No. Well, yes, but not like the way the word's being used, right? Whenever you have a law, you're going to inevitably discriminate people. So that's, again, where we want to have tolerance, when we can have a legitimate conversation and not just use a buzzword to shut people down. No, you're a bigot, you're discriminating, shut up, stop talking. No, let's have a healthy conversation about what is marriage. What is marriage? And then those that don't want a marriage, we're not actually discriminating. So they willfully withdraw from seeking it. Anything to add on that? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I was doing it to Mike because he asked it, but you go for it.
I was just thinking about when it comes to that, there's always some sort of explanation as related to discrimination too. Even when you see the notices, we don't discriminate on these grounds. They put the limits there, and I mean, it doesn't say go discriminate on this, but there's always an explanation surrounding discrimination. There is some sort of rationale behind it. I mean, when it comes to that, to marriage, there's not a discrimination there, but there's a social function in marriage, and I mean, just separate from the whole discrimination argument, because that isn't discrimination. Technically, gay people do have access. You just have to abide by the marriage rules, so to speak, the unwritten rules.
Right.
The self-explanatory part, man and woman.
Right. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. We actually have not ever discriminated. They have not wanted to partake of what marriage is. And so they're using that to call it discrimination. If you want to call it that, that's fine, but then you have to realize that we're always discriminating. There's always criteria for something that you either willfully conform to and you fit, or you don't. And that's just the way life is. And we use the word polarizing. It's a buzzword. It's meant to shut down conversation. Apply it to civil rights things, and the conversation doesn't move forward. We ostracize people, we silence their voice, and that's not a fair way to engage in conversation. It's manipulation is what it is. Anybody else?
So today in my class, modern early philosophy, we're going over the problem of evil and God, of course. So there were many points that I wanted to argue against throughout the entire argument. He gave several arguments for atheism, basically. Evil being evil, being incompatible with God. So, how do you know when to go into the discussion? And because even a professor, he's like agnostic, but he knew that I wanted to say something at the end of class, but he ended class early and purposely asked if there are any questions and not comments. And he's done it several times. So this is a two-part. That and the earlier statement when I said that street preachers treat other non-believers as a house built going down on fire, or being a house.
Well, let's just do one question, then the second one. So I didn't catch all of what your first question was, so just say it again.
So how do you know when to express your Christian beliefs, or at least participate in the discussion, and like just knowing when to do that, and not going attacking each point?
In the classroom or in general? In the classroom. Generally speaking, I think that the student is there to learn, not educate. So by and large, I think the student should just listen and ask questions and not make points and preach. That's a general position that you take to show respect to your professor. If you are going to engage your professor, I think you err on the side of respect and caution, not making a point in lecturing, but by asking questions and making statements. And there's a couple of strategies behind this. One, you're probably not an expert in whatever subject has come up. And if you make the statement, what do you bear the responsibility of? Proving it. So if you make a statement and the professor wants to challenge you on it and follow up on it and ask you another question about it, you better be ready for it. Most college students are not. And I don't mean that derogatory. Most people are not. Because we're just not experts in everything. And what ends up happening is not only now do you to the group look disrespectful. Who's this kid who thinks he knows everything? Now you look incompetent because you don't have an answer to the follow-up question. And you have just given a bad image to Christians. Rather, so if you just, in an environment, say, Professor, you've really attacked the reliability of the Bible, for example. You said that it's just forged. Have you ever looked into how many New Testament Greek manuscripts there are? Would you care to comment on the fact that we have over 5,000 Greek New Testament manuscripts? Well, what do you think about that? Man, you put him instantly on the hot seat, right? The burden of proof is now on him. You look respectful. You look cordial. Good image for Christians. It's also enticing to the rest of the room. Oh, wow, Christians, they've thought about this. They're insightful. And now the professor risks looking like the blowhard that just talks about things without having reasons to support them. So that's long and the short of it in general. In the classroom, you're there to learn. If you have the opportunity, do it in the form of a question.
I have a follow-up too. I think it's also respectful as part of the assignments. Instead of just going directly at the professor, talk about what you read in a book. This is what I saw in the book, and then ask a question.
Yeah.
So you're not, attacking maybe the professor's position, but you are bringing up the relevant text that they ask you to read. It's totally in class discussion to bring up the reading.
Some beliefs that you hold are true to you, of course, and and you're living with someone that says they're false. And tolerance is a society in which everybody can voice their opinion. How do you stop tolerance from boiling down to a grudging acceptance?
Just say that again. Let me make sure I understood it.
Given that you hold certain beliefs true, and you have to live with someone that says that they're false, and given that society, tolerance is a society that everybody can voice their opinions equally, how do you prevent from tolerance boiling down to a grudging acceptance?
So you just kind of accept it, and it kind of creates resentment or bitterness, and it's just
like these are the beliefs that you hold true and dear to you, but then again you're living with someone that says they're false. How do you prevent grudgingly accepting them?
Just giving in, is that what you're saying? Or I'm not following maybe someone else can pick up on this.
It sounds like just not engaging them at all. That's what you're saying, just kind of tolerating them and not...
Like living with them, but in a way you hold certain resentment because they could possibly pose a threat to your
environment.
Yeah, that's the risk, but it's a good risk. That is just, you can't. The only way to avoid that is to coerce people and not give them the ability to think, express, or act on what they think. So I think that's always the risk. I think ways to mitigate that risk are to just repeatedly and often engage in respectful conversations and to not just agree to disagree and never talk about it. Always find ways to respectfully engage the issue. So does that answer your question? Meaning, I don't think you just ever just let it be.
It doesn't solve the solution, but in a way it could build a compromise.
Yeah. And there are some things for which compromise is entirely appropriate,
Yeah.
and there are some things where compromise is just it's not appropriate. It's tantamount to consent or involvement in something that isn't good.
Right.
Do you think the church has kind of a martyr complex in the West these days? And does that sort of fit in with this tolerance discussion?
There's certainly, I guess, pockets of it.
It's Amber Alert.
That's probably what my phone was.
Yeah.
There's certainly developing in the West the woe is me mentality. And I would say this, there certainly are examples where Christians are being excluded from promotions, they're being fired, they're being fined for not servicing, like the bakers not baking cakes. So there's certainly reasons for that. One of the things that I encourage the church, though, is to just not use the word persecution, just to downplay, because there literally are people this day around the world that are losing their heads. So I don't think it serves us well at this point. We do sound like whiners. I think it's fine to expose what's happening, but not from the position of whining and, will someone please rescue us?
Right, right.
Adios, man. Smile for the camera when you leave. Yeah.
So, you're less interested in developing a sort of civil environment, like a civil, like governmental entity sort of responsibility, whereas like you're less interested in developing some sort of institution to enforce this, and are saying like each person should sort of adopt a like healthy mental life type thing. Like, is there any crossover between the?
Sure. I think it's fine for the government to step in and say, this language is not appropriate for TV. So censorship does have a place.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, it's one of the things that we protect, it's respect again. We don't think that on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, it's okay for ABC Family to have two people engaging in acts of sex using profanity when my 4-year-old kid might be flipping through the channels, right? We're fine for the government to step in and censor these types of things. So censorship in general, it has its place. So I think there is overlap.
Yeah, there's a thing about obscenity. There was a court case back in, I think it was like late 1900s about that.
Yeah. I think there is, as a people, I think there is the freedom to at sometimes explore certain words and phrases and just say that there is never a time where it's appropriate. I think that is not out of bounds, and so it is kind of a sticky thing, but this all has to happen in the framework of true tolerance, allowing people to disagree with you.
What do you do with people like you described who ask questions not because they care, but because they want to see you answer them? Not because they actually want to hear the answers, but because they want to pry you on. They've already made up their mind, and they just want to see your point of view suffer at the edge of their prying questions. It's terrible.
Again, you either don't answer it because your circumstances allow you not to answer
But it
it.
seems like they become your enemy at that point, and it's not a human interaction. It seems like there's an animosity there that you didn't ask for,
Yeah.
that a lot of people these days seem to have.
So you can do this. Again, you can just literally, again, hear this. You don't have to engage. You don't have to engage. If you want to, and you can tell a person is they're just asking a question, they don't look at you, you can just call people on it. You just literally can call people on it. You can say, hey, I don't think you actually really want to know what's going on here. It just seems like you just like to ask these questions to either put me on the hot seat, you do this to try to corner me, it seems like you're trying to attack. You can just call out somebody what you think they're doing. Again, you are not, your circumstance, you have to just, again, allow your circumstances to guide you into what you think you should do. There are certainly times when you don't have to answer. You can ask somebody what they're really after. And then there are times where your environment causes you to go, okay, I'm going to have to engage this because of who's watching. And then you take the most tactful way, stay within your wheelhouse, try not to open yourself up to places where you're going to be exposed because you don't really know. It's a complicated thing, but in general, you don't have to engage. You can turn it back on them by asking a question. I don't know like it's a satisfying answer to you.
No, I mean, it's the fact that these people are so passionate about taking down beliefs in such an impolite, rude, terrible way.
Yeah, and that's always going to be. I mean, there's nothing you can do about that.
But these people
That's
grow
gonna
up and
be
become the policymakers who help us, tell our kids what to do, and they'll,
You
I mean,
gotta have a really good answer for them, right?
So if you're worried about those people,
I'm worried about them dictating what's gonna happen 20 years from now because I didn't want to engage or because I asked them a question and I didn't call them out on it.
well, on the relational level, I think that's a misplaced fear. I don't think you need to carry the burden of, if I don't engage this guy right now, eventually he'll be president, ruin this country, and it's my fault. I think that's crazy. I think that's just not the right idea. And the counter, so on a relational level, don't worry about it. On a societal level, on a public level, we need to have more Christians involved in politics. I actually wrote an article, got a lot of heat over it. It's about pulpit needing to be political. And by that I didn't mean about endorsing particular candidates, but addressing social issues, political ramifications of things, etc. The church has kept their hands out of politics for too long for some stupid reason, I don't know what. So the solution is on a relational level, don't worry about it. We place so much weight on winning every conversation that the fate of the universe doesn't hang on you solving this guy's misconceptions right there. But then on a corporate level, we just need to have more Christians involved in society.
What is the purpose of the church being more political? What's the end game on that?
To me, the reason we get involved in society because we've been given the great commandment to love God and who else?
Your neighbor.
Your neighbor. In a democratic society where essentially we are our own rulers, yes, we have a representative democracy, but still they answer to us. We are the bosses of our politicians. We are a self-ruled country. We need to be involved in public policy, seeking to promote that which is good and limit that which is harmful. It's an extension of the way we love our neighbor. We want to promote human flourishing. There's nothing unbiblical about just seeking a healthy role in society. Likewise, it's not biblical to say, hey, atheist, you go run the country, I'm sure you'll do all right. Well, where in the Bible does it say anything like that? It doesn't say we're just to retreat. No, we're to engage, love this world, seek to promote human flourishing.